Years ago, I made a decision that, at the time, seemed harmless. A chance to escape the chaos of city life for the peace and solitude of the countryside. My job was demanding, and the holiday season had become an overwhelming whirlwind of expectations. That year, I decided to spend Christmas alone, in an old farmhouse I had recently purchased. It was meant to be a retreat, a way to reconnect with myself. The farmhouse was nestled in a snow-covered valley, surrounded by fields and dense woods. I had spent the past few weekends decorating it for Christmas. The tree in the living room sparkled with lights, and the mantel above the fireplace was adorned with stockings and garlands. Outside, strings of colorful bulbs lit up the porch, casting a warm glow against the frosty air. The night of Christmas Eve was calm. I sat by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and reading an old book I'd found in the farmhouse attic. The silence outside was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional howl of the wind. It was a different kind of quiet, one that felt heavy, as though the house itself was listening. But as the hours passed, something began to feel off. At first, it was just a faint sound, like the jingling of bells in the distance. I dismissed it, assuming it was a neighbor's decoration swaying in the wind. Yet, as the night deepened, the sound grew closer, more distinct. It wasn't rhythmic or cheerful like Christmas carols. It was sharp, irregular, and unsettling. I shrugged it off and decided to check the property before heading to bed. Stepping onto the porch, the cold bit at my skin. My breath formed misty clouds in the air. The fields were bathed in moonlight, the snow untouched, except for a line of footprints leading toward the barn. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone, and those prints hadn't been there earlier. I followed the footprints with hesitant steps, gripping the flashlight tightly in my hand. They led straight to the barn, where the wooden doors stood slightly ajar. I hesitated, the icy wind whistling through the cracks. My mind raced with possibilities. An animal, perhaps, or a stray hiker seeking shelter. But deep down, I knew it wasn't either of those things. As I peered into the barn, my flashlight beams swept across the space. It was empty, except for some old tools and hay bales. The footprints ended abruptly inside, as though whoever or whatever had made them had vanished. A chill ran down my spine. I closed the barn doors, secured them with a latch, and hurried back to the house, my pulse quickening. Back inside, I locked the doors and tried to calm my nerves. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks. Yet, as I settled onto the couch, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A shadow outside the window. It was faint but unmistakable, a figure standing motionless by the porch steps. I froze, unable to move or think. The figure was tall, clad in what appeared to be a Santa Claus suit. But it wasn't the jovial image you'd expect. The suit was tattered and stained, and the figure's posture was unnaturally rigid. The worst part was the eyes, two bright, glowing orbs that pierced through the darkness, staring directly at me. I scrambled to my feet and closed the curtains, my hands trembling. My heart pounded as I tried to process what I had just seen. Who was that? What did they want? I paced the room, debating whether to call the police, but the farmhouse's remote location meant help wouldn't arrive quickly. Minutes passed like hours. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the faint sound of snow crunching outside. I didn't dare open the curtains again. Instead, I turned off the lights, hoping the darkness would make it harder for the figure to see inside. But then came the knock, slow, deliberate, and unervingly calm. The knock echoed through the silent house, each rap on the wooden door like a hammer striking my nerves. I stood frozen in the living room, my breath shallow and ragged. Whoever, or whatever, was outside wasn't in any hurry. The knocks came steadily, one after another, as if they were waiting for me to answer. I forced myself to move, inching toward the front door, every muscle in my body screaming to run in the opposite direction. I kept the lights off, hoping to remain invisible in the darkness. When I reached the door, I stood still, my ear pressed against the cold wood. I strained to hear anything, breathing, footsteps, but there was only silence. Gathering what little courage I had, I whispered through the door, "Who's there?" No response. I whispered again, louder this time, "Who are you? What do you want?" Still nothing. But then, just as I thought the visitor had left, the knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound that chilled me to my core, a raspy chuckle, low and guttural. It was coming from the other side of the door, and it didn't sound human. I stumbled back, tripping over a side table and sending a lamp crashing to the floor. The sound must have startled whoever was outside because the chuckling stopped. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought they might leave. But then I heard it. Footsteps crunching through the snow, moving away from the porch and toward the back of the house. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't leaving. They were circling the house. I scrambled to check all the locks, bolting every door and window. My hands trembled as I latched the back door, peering out into the night. The snow reflected the faint moonlight, making it easy to see the figure moving across the yard. They stopped beneath the large oak tree, standing perfectly still, their glowing red eyes fixed on the house. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't connect. My stomach sank as I realized the storm had knocked out the cell signal. I was truly alone. I retreated to the living room, clutching the fireplace poker as my only weapon. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. I kept my eyes glued to the curtains, waiting for any sign of movement. Minutes turned into hours, and I began to think, hope, that the figure had gone. Then, without warning, a loud crash shattered the stillness. It came from the kitchen. My heart leaped into my throat as I crept toward the sound, every step feeling like an eternity. The kitchen window was shattered, shards of glass glittering on the floor. Snow blew in through the opening, carried by the icy wind. I scanned the room, but there was no sign of the intruder. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, the faint glow of red eyes in the doorway. He was inside. The figure stepped into the dim light of the kitchen, and I finally saw him clearly. The tattered Santa suit hung loosely on his gaunt frame, stained with what could only be blood. His face was pale and hollow, his grin unnaturally wide, revealing teeth that looked more like fangs. The eyes, those glowing red orbs, seemed to pierce through me, filling me with a primal fear I had never known. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted out of the kitchen and up the stairs, slamming the door to the bedroom behind me. My hands fumbled to lock it as heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs. My chest heaved as I backed away, clutching the fireplace poker tightly. The footsteps stopped outside the door, followed by a low, guttural voice that rasped, "You've been naughty." The door shook violently as he tried to force it open. I braced myself, gripping the poker with white knuckles. The door splintered, and just as it gave way, I swung with all my strength. The poker connected with a sickening thud, and the figure stumbled back, falling down the stairs. I didn't wait to see if he would get up. I grabbed my car keys and sprinted down the hall, leaping over his motionless body at the bottom of the stairs. Outside, the freezing air bit at my skin as I dashed to my car. The engine roared to life, and I tore down the driveway, not daring to look back. I drove through the night, not stopping until I was miles away from the farmhouse. My mind raced, replaying the events over and over. Who, or what, had that been? What did they want? And why had they chosen me? When I finally reached the safety of a gas station on the outskirts of a small town, I parked and sat in silence, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The attendants gave me odd looks, but I didn't care. I was alive. I never returned to that farmhouse. It sat abandoned, a relic of a night I would never forget. Every Christmas since, I've been haunted by the memory of those glowing red eyes and the guttural voice that still echoes in my nightmares. Months passed, and I tried to move on from that horrifying Christmas night. I sold the farmhouse without setting foot there again. The new owners never contacted me, which I took as a good sign. Still, the memory lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every creak of a floorboard, every howl of the wind sent me spiraling back to that night. I avoided the countryside entirely, preferring the safety of crowded cities. Yet, every December, as Christmas approached, I felt a growing unease. The lights and decorations that once brought me joy now filled me with dread. The sight of Santa Claus figurines made my stomach churn, and the sound of jingle bells felt like a cruel mockery. One December evening, nearly a year after that night, I received a package. It was delivered to my apartment, wrapped in brown paper with no return address. My heart sank as I stared at it, a sense of dread creeping over me. Against my better judgment, I brought it inside. The package was small and light. I unwrapped it slowly, my hands trembling. Inside was a single item, a red Santa hat. It looked old and worn, and the edges were stained with what I prayed was just dirt. My breath hitched as I noticed a note tucked beneath the hat. Written in jagged, shaky letters were the words, "I told you I'd see you again." I froze, my mind racing. How had they found me? Why now? I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the implications. Whatever, or whoever, it was, they hadn't forgotten me. It's strange how the mind clings to certain memories. For me, this one lingers like a shadow, a Christmas I'll never forget. It happened years ago when I was living alone for the first time. The decision to spend Christmas by myself wasn't intentional. It just sort of happened. My family was scattered, my friends had their own plans, and honestly, I thought I'd enjoy the solitude. My new house was small but charming, nestled on the edge of a quiet town. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe after a tumultuous year. I decorated the house modestly, a string of lights around the windows, a small tree in the corner of the living room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make the place feel warm. On Christmas morning, I woke up to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the curtains. The snow outside was untouched, pristine, as if the world had paused just for me. I stretched lazily, savoring the quiet, until my eyes fell on something under the tree, a present. I froze. I hadn't placed it there. It was wrapped in deep red paper with a golden bow tied perfectly on top. No name, no card, nothing to indicate who had left it. My first thought was that maybe a neighbor had dropped it off, but I hadn't heard a knock or seen anyone. My second thought, more unsettling, was that someone had entered the house while I was sleeping. Curiosity won over caution. I knelt by the tree, my heart pounding, and carefully unwrapped the box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a doll. A porcelain doll with delicate features, painted eyes that seemed to stare right through me, and hair the exact shade of mine. But what truly sent chills down my spine was its clothing, an eerily accurate replica of the outfit I had worn the day before, down to the silver necklace I always wore. I stared at the doll, unease creeping through me. How was this possible? Who could have made something so precise? The questions swirled in my mind as I set the doll aside, trying to shake off the strange feeling. I convinced myself it was a coincidence, a prank maybe, and left it in the corner of the room. But as the day wore on, I couldn't ignore the way its eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went. That evening, the quiet of the house felt oppressive, like the walls were closing in. I tried to distract myself with a book, but my eyes kept drifting toward the corner where the doll sat. It hadn't moved, of course it hadn't, but something about its presence was deeply unsettling. After dinner, I decided to put it away. I placed it in a box and tucked it into the closet in the spare bedroom. Out of sight, out of mind, I thought. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint sound, a soft tap tap tap, like someone gently knocking on wood. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat, straining to hear. The sound stopped. I told myself it was the house settling or the wind outside and forced myself to lie back down. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. It was coming from the direction of the spare bedroom. I hesitated but finally mustered the courage to get up and check. The hallway was dark, the air cold against my skin. I pushed open the door to the spare bedroom, and my heart nearly stopped. The closet door was open, and the box where I had placed the doll was empty. My eyes scanned the room, and there it was, sitting in the middle of the bed, its painted eyes staring directly at the doorway. Panic gripped me. I grabbed the doll, my hands trembling, and put it back in the box. This time, I carried it to the garage and shoved it onto a high shelf, as far out of reach as possible. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. That night, I barely slept. Every creak, every shadow, felt like a threat. And though I told myself it was over, deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. My dreams had been restless, filled with fragments of the doll's cold stare and whispers I couldn't quite make out. I tried to shake it off as my imagination running wild, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. As I walked into the living room, my stomach dropped. The doll was back. It was sitting on the couch, upright, as if someone had carefully placed it there. I froze, my mind racing. I had left it locked in the garage. How had it gotten out? Who could have done this? I slowly approached it, half expecting it to move, but it just sat there, lifeless yet unnervingly present. My hand trembled as I reached out to touch it, and that's when I noticed something different. Its expression had changed. The faint smile that had once adorned its face was now twisted into something closer to a smirk. I yanked my hand back, a chill running down my spine. I grabbed the doll and stuffed it back into the box, taping it shut this time. I carried it to my car, determined to take it far away and throw it out for good. But as I backed out of the driveway, something caught my eye in the rear-view mirror. Written in the condensation of the back window were the words, "You can't get rid of me." I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest. Turning around, I saw the message had already faded, as if it had never been there. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but I kept driving. I found a dumpster several blocks away and tossed the box inside. For good measure, I piled garbage bags on top of it and drove home, praying this would finally end. But it didn't. That evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I noticed something written on the mirror in my bathroom. It was faint, as if traced by a finger. "Why did you leave me?" The words sent a jolt of fear through me. My reflection stared back at me, wide-eyed and pale, as if even I couldn't believe what was happening. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, every light in the house turned on. I kept telling myself it was over, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels alive, as though something is holding its breath and waiting. By morning, I was done. I couldn't stay in that house another night. I retrieved the doll from the living room where, somehow, it had found its way back again. This time, I didn't even hesitate. I wrapped it in an old blanket, shoved it into a bag, and drove to the river on the outskirts of town. The drive felt endless, each passing minute filled with a growing sense of dread. When I finally arrived, the river was as still as glass, the winter air biting against my skin. I stepped out of the car, gripping the bag tightly, and made my way to the water's edge. The current was slow but steady, carrying chunks of ice downstream. I hesitated, a part of me still clinging to the irrational fear that this wasn't enough, that it wouldn't work. But then I looked down at the bag, and that smirk, the smirk that hadn't been there before, seemed to mock me. Without another thought, I hurled it into the river with all my strength. The bag hit the water with a splash and began to sink. I watched as it disappeared beneath the surface, carried away by the current until it was out of sight. For the first time in days, I felt a small measure of relief. As I stood there, the cold seeping through my coat, I whispered under my breath, "It's over." But even as I said the words, a nagging doubt lingered. Who had sent me that doll? Why had it been made to look exactly like me? And what did it want? I never got those answers, and I'm not sure I ever will. But one thing is certain, I never spent another Christmas alone. And every time I see a doll, I can't help but feel that it's watching me. Waiting. Years have passed since that Christmas, yet the memory clings to me like a shadow. Life moved on as it does, but some things you can't leave behind, no matter how hard you try. I moved to a new town not long after that night, trading the quiet isolation of my old house for the comforting noise of a bustling neighborhood. I told myself it was time for a fresh start, that I needed to be closer to people. And while the move helped, it didn't erase the lingering questions. Every Christmas, I find myself scanning the gifts under the tree, half expecting to see that familiar red wrapping paper and golden bough. I've even developed a strange habit of checking the windows and doors before bed, making sure they're locked, even when I know they already are. It's not paranoia, I tell myself. It's caution. But deep down, I know it's more than that. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of the river. In my dreams, it's not the peaceful stream I remember. It's dark, the water churning violently, and somewhere beneath the surface, I can feel the doll waiting, watching. It never appears in these dreams, but its presence is undeniable, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I've tried to rationalize what happened that Christmas. Maybe it was an elaborate prank, though I can't fathom who would go to such lengths, or why. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, a stress-induced hallucination born from spending too much time alone. But then I remember the doll's smirk, the messages on the mirror, and the way it always seemed to find its way back. I haven't told anyone the full story. How could I? It sounds absurd, like something out of a horror movie. But every year, as the holidays approach, I feel the same unease creeping back. It's not fear, exactly. It's something subtler, harder to define, a sense that the story isn't over. A few weeks ago, while tidying up my new home, I came across an old photograph. It was from years before, taken at a Christmas party when I was still a teenager. Everyone was smiling, holding glasses of eggnog, the room filled with holiday cheer. But in the background, almost hidden by the crowd, there was something I hadn't noticed before. A doll. Sitting on a shelf, its painted eyes fixed directly on the camera. It wasn't identical to the one I found that Christmas, but it was close enough to send a chill down my spine. Had it always been there? Or was it another coincidence? One more thing my mind was twisting into a connection? I'll probably never know the truth. And maybe that's for the best. But as the holidays approach once again, I can't help but wonder, what if it comes back? What if this time, there's no river deep enough to hide it? Some questions are better left unanswered. But every time I hear the soft creak of a floorboard or see a shadow move out of the corner of my eye, I can't help but feel that it's still out there, waiting for the right moment to return. To hear more stories like this, subscribe and leave a like.